So, you get your emotional intelligence going, which is what hostage negotiation is, the tactical empathy, the tactical application of empathy. And you can create a great team, and then, you're all smart together. And that's how you get to be the smartest person in the room.
It's our limiting beliefs that ultimately keep us from becoming the best we're capable of becoming. Something's got to change, but that change has to happen first on the inside. It's time to get unstuck. It's time to get your why back. It's never too late. Let's start today.
Helping you design your roadmap to wholeness from the inside out. This is Win Today. And now, here's your host, Christopher Cook.
Hey, my friends, welcome to the conversation. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for the download as always. This is episode 135, and this is your roadmap to wholeness. I'm so glad you're here, and you better buckle your seatbelt, guys. This is going to be one you're going to remember for a while. We're talking about communication in relationships today, but we're taking a different angle because one of the greatest relationship skills you'll ever acquire, my friend, is the ability to negotiate. But most of the tactics we've learned about negotiation don't really work. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, how did the last negotiation you were in turn out? Even if it did work out in your favor, see, the ability to accelerate in relationship communication is vital, and it could save your life. Guys, our guest today knows negotiation on a level of intensity and pressure many of us will never have to experience. For over 2 decades, Chris Voss was the lead international kidnapping negotiator for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as the FBI's hostage negotiation representative for the National Security Council's hostage working group. During his government career, he also represented the U.S. government at 2 international conferences sponsored by the G8 as an expert in kidnapping. But prior to becoming the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator, Chris served as the lead crisis negotiator for the New York City division of the FBI and was a member of the New York City Joint Terrorist Task Force for 14 years. Suffice to say, he's seen some things. How's this for a resume? Chris was the case agent on TERRSTOP, the TWA Flight 800 catastrophe, and he negotiated the surrender of the first hostage taker to give up in the Chase Manhattan bank robbery hostage taking. During Chris's 24-year tenure in the Bureau, he was trained in the art of negotiation by not only the FBI, but by Scotland Yard and Harvard Law School. Needless to say, this is one bad dude. In today's conversation, Chris is going to unpack negotiation secrets and strategies that will enable you to win at work and create more meaningful relationships at home. The skills you're about to learn could very well be the difference maker you need to form greater connection in every relational situation you face. You ready? Here's the conversation with the FBI's former lead hostage negotiator, Chris Voss. Chris, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much, man. I'm happy to be here.
Well, hey, listen, the title of your book and the subject of our conversation today is Never Split the Difference, negotiating as if your life depended on it. Let's start there. What does the phrase mean, and why is it so important to this conversation?
Well, you shouldn't split the difference. I mean, compromise is a really bad idea. Compromise is, compromise leaves everybody unhappy. And I think a great analogy is a marriage. Do you want a marriage where everybody's unhappy?
Right. Well, let's go back to your early days then, Chris. When you said yes to this profession of hostage negotiation, I mean, I'm assuming you probably walked into it with some already available skills in life. And as a person, what were they?
Now, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I underestimated the depth that it would take to become a good communicator, to really listen to other people, to dial into other people. People think just because they can talk that they can communicate. I certainly thought that. And I really, and great communication looks easy. It looks natural. It becomes seamless. But, really listening and interacting with someone is a lot more complicated than most people think, mainly because we don't see very many examples of it being done well. Mm-hmm. So, I sort of stumbled into it. I was a SWAT guy. I had a recurrent knee injury. I wanted to stay in crisis response. We had hostage negotiators. And, of course, since somebody's good at it, made it look seamless, I figured I could do it. I figured it'd be easy. It ended up being a lot more complicated and rewarding than I ever expected.
Well, it's just an overview question, Chris. I want to start here. I'd love to ask you to talk about getting to yes in any negotiation. For all of us involved in negotiation on any level in any relationship, Chris, where do we get it wrong?
The biggest problem is yes has become such a trap, and yes is nothing without how anyway. And a lot of people get confused because they think they've got an agreement, and you get into how. I mean, we got a great problem going in the United States right now over how. Presidential candidate promised a wall. And everybody that thought it was a good idea said yes, and nobody ever got into how. And he implied a how, which people thought, all right, he knows what he's talking about. Mexico's going to pay for the wall. It sounds like a great idea. We're not entirely sure that it's the best answer, but it's an answer. And if somebody else is going to pay for it, then it's worth trying. And as it has turned out, the how has gotten enormously complicated. So yes is nothing without how. And as soon as you get out of yes, yes is nothing by itself. A long time ago, somebody invented this idea called momentum selling, or the yes momentum. And what it is really a trap. And you start, you lead somebody into a trap. Would you like to make more money? Would you like to have more free time? Would you like to travel the world and stay in 5-star locations for free? And at some point in time, we know that it sounds too good to be true, but you start throwing yeses in, it's probably going to be too good to be true. So if you get out of yes entirely and you get into how, your communication gets really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, there's a background to your story and to this story. I'd love to know, just out of curiosity, where did this start for you? What was life early on like? How did you get into this profession?
Well, I wanted to be in law enforcement. I saw a movie when I was a teenager, The Super Cops, about 2 New York City police officers that were just wildly creative, and they put a lot of really bad people in jail, and the community really loved them for the service that they gave them. And I was just kind of blown away by the creativity of it all and wanted to get into law enforcement. I was a cop in Kansas City. Loved it, but then stumbled into the FBI, looking at federal law enforcement. That ended up being better than I expected it would be, and got on the SWAT team. And then again, that's when my knee issues from college cropped back up, and I loved crisis response. And next thing I know, next thing you know, old Jeb's millionaire. Next thing you know, I became a hostage negotiator.
Unbelievable. Well, Chris, I want to dive in tactically because this conversation with you today is all about how to negotiate as if our life depended on it. I really believe people could improve in this skill. And so the subtitle of Chapter 1, this is where I want to start, is how to become the smartest person in the room. Who wouldn't want to be that person? So, Chris, teach us if you would.
Yeah, it's emotional intelligence. There's not a lot of competition for the smartest emotionally intelligent person in the room, because everybody wants to be the smartest IQ person in the room. A long time ago, interestingly enough, there was a book called The Smartest Guys in the Room, and it was the Enron guys, and they totally destroyed a company and partially took down an industry, with their intelligence. So IQ is just not getting problems solved where collaboration is required. So, you get your emotional intelligence going, which is what hostage negotiation is, the tactical empathy, the tactical application of empathy. And you can create a great team, and then, you're all smart together. And that's how you get to be the smartest person in the room.
I would think most of the listeners are probably not walking into hostile situations like you experienced in your professional career, but they're walking into maybe a tenuous situation at work or a tenuous dating relationship. Take what you just said, Chris, and if we could kind of apply it to those situations, what would you have to say?
Well, hostage negotiations are actually calmer than all the stuff you talked about.
Oh my God. You're kidding.
Because there's something special about once one person in the conversation really starts to listen to the other side, there's a quantum leap forward in how the communication proceeds. And most conversations, nobody's listening. They're focused on what they have to say. What I want. I want you to listen to me. And there's so much more tension in interpersonal relationships and in business negotiations. Like every business person that we've coached, and we do a lot of coaching. We coach a lot of people through deals, more than I ever thought we would. But everybody we've coached has got 5 or 6 stories of business counterparts storming out of rooms, slamming their hands down on the table, calling them names. It's commonplace.
Yeah.
Hostage negotiators, we got one story, and it happened early in the negotiation, if at all, and we calmed them right down and got past it. It's crazy what a difference it makes once one side starts listening.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I want to pull a quote from your book and ask you to teach it on a granular level in the context of this conversation. And it's this. Chapter 1, you wrote, quote, "It all starts with the universally applicable premise that people want to be understood and accepted. Listening is the cheapest yet most effective concession we can make to get there." He went on to say, "By listening intently, a negotiator demonstrates empathy and shows a sincere desire to better understand what the other side is experiencing." Chris, that's a strong teaching point. Unpack that for us.
Well, it's kind of crazy. In every deal, there's something the other side wants more actually than an agreement. We believe the world splits up evenly into thirds, which is fight, flight, and make friends. And 2 out of 3 of those types just want to be understood. And that's all they want. I think all of us can think of a boss that we worked for at one point in time when, the boss may not have done what we wanted him to, but the boss always heard us out. And we loved following, working with people who heard us out, just heard us out, not agreed, just heard us out. And that's kind of how we end up at loggerheads in most conversations, because you get 2 people driving really hard to be heard out, then they get even more frustrated as the process goes forward. Covey's advice way back when wasn't seek first to be understood and keep at it till you're understood. Covey said seek first to understand, then be understood.
Right.
And you change that sequence, and it's actually demonstrating understanding. I know that's what he meant. He was trying to give us a short phrase, but you got to show the other side that you've understood him. And most people think that you can, the shorthand for that, the shortcut, the hack, the back door is just say, "I understand." Well, there isn't anybody out there that can look back to a conversation where the other person said, "I understand," when it wasn't followed by, "But here's what I think." And we think that that's demonstrating understanding. It's not. It doesn't. It's fallen short of what Covey wanted us to do.
Chris, take us back. It's September 30th, 1993. 2 masked bank robbers hijacked a Chase Manhattan Bank at 7th and Carroll in Brooklyn. What happened next? I'd love for you to tell us that story.
Well, there I was, drinking coffee in the FBI office. Now, it's kind of crazy. It was a funny setup because I'm in the FBI office in New York getting ready to do an interview on a terrorism-related matter. And my buddy Charlie comes in and says, "Hey, man, there's a bank robber in Brooklyn. We got to go." So and the interview was an important terrorism interview, and I had a great partner, NYPD detective, and I said, "Tommy, can you take this interview for me? I got to go." And Charlie and I jump in his bureau vehicle, the vernacular we would say the Bu car, Bu short for bureau, and we blast out to 7th and Carroll in Brooklyn, and then to make it even more comedic, at that point in time. Charlie is post-surgery on his left knee. I am getting ready to have surgery on my right knee. So we're kind of like a 3-legged man. We don't have enough good legs to go around. We end up on the inner perimeter, closer to the bank than we should have been. We bail out of the car, low crawl from the car into the command post. And, now the hostage team is forming up. combined NYPD hostage negotiators with FBI hostage negotiators. We don't know what the hell is going on inside. We got a fair amount of information. Almost all of it's bad, and we call into the bank to see what's going on.
How'd the story resolve?
Good guys won. Come on now.
Of course.
Good guys won. We saved the day. Got the girl. Got the sports car.
Unpack the negotiation. I mean, what'd that look like? How'd you diffuse? I mean, here's the thing, Chris. I just wonder, I mean, is your heart beating out of your chest? I mean, what's happening? Do you develop I've heard it about SEAL training, that they can just slow their heartbeat down so methodically. I mean, what's going on inside your body? You got ice water running through your veins?
Well, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your highest level of preparation. Nobody rises to the occasion. Now, my prep at this point in time was really good. I had been volunteered on a suicide hotline for almost 2 years at that point in time. I'd been volunteering there long enough to know that it was exactly the same process. I'd been on the hotline about a year when I got to the hostage negotiation training, and I remember sitting at the training. I've been doing this for a year. I just didn't have a SWAT team outside. So by the time we lock into this bank thing, and bank robberies with hostages where you actually negotiate are the rarest of rare. The last time that happened in New York City was 20 years earlier.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, the bad guys just get away. It happens in the movies all the time, but in reality, it never happens. But I'm good with my process. I've been practicing. Michael Jordan hits game-winning shots. Magic Johnson hit game-winning shots. Larry Bird hit game-winning shots. Because out in the backyard, they practiced it in simulated game conditions over and over and over and over and over. I mean, yeah, that's how you rise to the occasions, your preparation. My prep was good. I'd been on the hotline. I knew I had a communication approach that was exceptionally effective. All I had to do was, execute my offense. And I got on the phone. First negotiator had been on the phone for about 5 hours, and we had gotten it to a complete stalemate, which is not bad because that means the threat level is low. And the NYPD commander decided to swap negotiators, and he looked at the other guy, said, "You're out." And he looked at me and he said, "You're in. This is what I want you to do." He put me in a game, gave me some real explicit instructions, and an hour and a half later, I had to surrender.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was great team game. I had a good leader that did a great analysis. I had a process that I was comfortable with. We teach this stuff to business people, and we say, look, just get the process. The process will take care of you, give you your maximum chance of success. We're going to give you very specific skills. Just relax into the process because this process is good. And part of the process was I had people around me coaching me, and I was open to coaching. 2 different instances I was handed critical notes because the listener is always going to hear more than a talker does. And one of the listeners heard some key aspects. We'd been hammering a bank robber to come out, and one of my colleagues, a guy named Jamie, his instinct recognized, ask a bank robber to come out. And a note appears in my hand. I don't know it at the time. It's from Jamie. And it says, ask him if he wants to come out. And I do an immediate pivot from let a hostage go to, hey, man, why don't you come out? And the bank robber hesitates for a second, and he says, I don't know how to do that, which is a great big giant yes. If you can figure out how to get me out of here, I'm out. And we turned it completely, it was a 180 at that point in time. And an hour and a half later, we had the guy out.
My gosh. Chris, strategically and even tactically, I'm sure you employed a lot of the things that we're talking about today. I'd love to talk about and ask you to teach us how to employ mirroring. I think that is so powerful. And then you talk about silences. And then, as you write, the late night DJ voice and communication with others. I think mirroring is so powerful, but I'd love everyone to hear that and then learn how to apply it.
Yeah, mirroring is ridiculously simple. I mean, it's the easiest Jedi mind trick we have, and it was actually a real critical turning point in the bank robbery, because that bank robber, I didn't know it at the time, exhibited many of the best characteristics of great influential negotiators. You know, you get a really smart deal maker on one side of the table, and that deal maker is going to say, yeah, you know, it's not up to me. I mean, I got a whole team over here. I got a board of directors. I got all these people that I'm answerable to. A deal maker that diminishes their importance at the table is a ridiculously important person. And if they're really good at it, they'll almost make them seem like they're inadequate. And we had originally assessed this bank robber as being inadequate because he kept talking about how scared he was of the other bank robbers. There were a bunch of them. They were dangerous. They were more dangerous than him. And he was the guy. He was tightly controlled. He thought about everything he said. The only time we ever caught him off guard is when I mirrored him. A mirror is simply just repeating the last 1 to 3 words of what somebody's just said. And it's not the body language mirror where if they put their hand to the chin, you put your hand to your chin. It's not that at all. The hostage negotiators the hostage negotiator's mirror is just focused on the words, and you start with the last 1 to 3 words of what somebody just said. And there's something about that, it just creates a connection in somebody's brain that causes them to reword and expand.
Totally.
And it works every time. I mean, like, it's insane how much it works. It's one of the few things we don't have a neuroscience explanation to back it up for why it works. We just know it works. I mean, it's one of those things like, I don't know how gravity works. I just see its effects all the time. I'm satisfied it's there. And mirrors are pretty much exactly the same thing. We see its effects all the time. And what happened was this really tightly controlled bank robber, I asked him about the van that was outside, that was registered in his name. Mm-hmm. And I said, we found a van out here. He says, we have more than one van. And I said, you have more than one van? He says, yeah, well, we only have one van. I said, you only have one van? He says, yeah, well, you chased my driver away. And I said, we chased your driver away? And he said, yeah, when he saw the police, he cut and run. Now, at this point in time, we don't even know that there's a bank robber that's left the scene. And it's clearly against our guy's interest to be implicating anybody because he's trying to get away. And if he implicates somebody else, then that's one more potential witness against him. But he couldn't help himself. And that's what happens with a mirror, just a repetition of the last 1 or 3 words. Not only people don't repeat what they just said, they change the words, they expand on it, they go on. It happens so much, and it's the simplest skill. So many people are reluctant because they can't imagine something that simple would be that effective. But once they get used to it, they love it. People are mirroring other people all the time, and nobody ever sees it.
So let's play this out in a work situation. You've got a boss that's explaining to you details on a deadline or a project, or maybe you're in a relationship and there's a little bit of a tension point. Play this out. What would that look like?
Well, first of all, you listen, so that helps the other side. If you're repeating what they just said, the first light bulb that goes on over their head is that you actually heard them. So that begins to help them relax to begin with. Because most people are used to be reacted to with a counter argument or ignoring what they said or a statement that indicates that what they just said wasn't even heard at all, which ramps up their frustration and makes them even more unhappy. So that you've automatically begun to diffuse the situation by demonstrating understanding, which is what Covey wanted us to do all along anyway. And then if you upward inflect, it's a genuine question. And that's why when I said, he said, you chased my driver away. I said, we chased your driver away?
Wow.
And that question is the question sound is very encouraging. That, one of the great marks of a master communicator is tone of voice. Another thing that people massively underestimate how much you could do with the tone of voice and how much you can communicate and how you can encourage people and reach into their brain just with your tone of voice. So the tone of voice in that is really important. And I'm trying to recall it word for word. One of the examples in a book, a young lady is working for a boss that, despite they're putting together a voluminous project for a client, and it can go on a simple disk. It's digital. But the boss is old school, and not only do they want a hard copy paper, they want 2 hard copies, which this is a massive project. I mean, there are probably a couple thousand pages for each copy. And, she said, well, I want 2 copies for the client. And the employee said, 2 copies for the client? And the boss said, yeah, well, maybe not 2 copies, but a hard copy for me and a digital copy for a client. And a hard copy for you. Yeah, a hard copy for me. And she said, you could just store it anywhere. And the employee said, store it anywhere? And the boss thought for a second and thought, yeah, I really don't have room for it in my office, and we don't have anywhere else to store it, so just make the digital copies, and that's good for now. And so, the mirroring triggered contemplation in the boss. And you got to like a negotiation skill that works with a boss, because then it works with everybody. There's power and deference. And if it works on a boss, it's a good skill. If it doesn't work on a boss, it ain't such a good skill.
So people don't pick up on what you're doing. Like if you're in a conversation with your boss or whatever, they're not going, wait a minute, what are you doing right now? No,
they don't. They don't, because first thing, if somebody's talking to you, they want you to listen. And they're used to arguing. And so the mirror is an indicator that you're listening. You can't mirror if you're not listening. And so, first of all, that gets you past the initial barrier, the intense desire to be heard. And then you just, tone of voice is critical, and, using dynamic silence, a dynamic use of silence. Mirror someone and then go silent. I mean, and it's so effective at clarification that I don't even ask people, what do you mean by that anymore? I mean, if somebody says something that I don't understand, I just mirror it. And, I'll work my way through a 45-minute conversation with somebody, just mirroring.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's powerful. Well, and to me, Chris, what I estimate is that builds trust and communication with others, and that's where empathy comes into relationships. How else would you suggest that we better earn trust and understanding?
Well, take the word trust out and put in predictability, and then you've just solved the riddle of trust. I mean, wow. We want to know what to expect from someone. We want to know, make them predictable. And, a deeper meaning of trust is, will they look out for us first? But they got to be aware of us first. And as soon as you start to add predictability, even in tiny little ways, it begins to change everything. We coach a lot of real estate agents. And I say, you're in the trust business. And just like in a kidnapping, you can't tell your client when it's going to be over. So go from them wondering when it's going to be over, they also wonder when they're going to hear from you again. Make the system more predictable. Let them know that in the real estate, let them know your client, they're going to hear from you every Wednesday at 10 o'clock no matter what. And that makes your communication predictable, and then your trust is going to go through the roof. And so you can begin to add in predictability in tiny little ways. Now, a lot of people initially push back, and they'll say, what if I don't have anything to tell them?
Yeah.
And my advice then is that's exactly the problem, because you only call them when you have good news and you have bad news, and they don't know when either is going to come, which is the unknown is the maximum stressor. You were mentioning Navy SEALs to begin with.
All right.
They stress Navy SEALs out by not letting them know when it's going to be over. They take them on an exercise, and they say, just exercise till we're done. Well, how long is it going to be? We're not going to tell you. Because the unknown is such a massive stressor. And it's the same way with us in everyday interactions. So let them know when they're going to hear from you again. In any project, anybody that I'm working from, if I got some business colleagues that never get back to me because they don't have any good news. So I'm completely in the dark, and I'm getting fed up with being in the dark.
Chris, what happens then if someone walks into negotiation with us and they're upset? How do we diffuse based upon maybe what you just taught us?
Well, what they're looking for is just an awareness on your side that they're upset, or that they're upset for a reason. And we teach people to say, wow, this is clearly very important to you. Because if somebody yells at you, the first thing they want you to know is that this is important. And if they can accomplish that goal, then they're immediately going to calm down. There was another instance, client referred to it as a boss drive-by. Boss comes screaming by the desk, come on with me, we've got a problem, we got to take care of it right now. And the employee said to the boss, wow, this sounds really important. And the boss calms down, like 50% immediately, because their first goal is met. So if somebody's yelling at you, the first thing they're trying to communicate is, this is important, I have a reason for yelling at you. So as soon as you indicate an awareness of that, half of their objective has been met, and the chances they're going to interact with you collaboratively have just gone through the roof.
Chris, a lot of times in those situations, defensiveness comes out, insecurity comes out, and accusations come out. So let's say we're in the situation that you just described, and say the other party's flinging accusations our way. You never do this. You always do this. How do we diffuse that situation?
Yeah, just by calling them out. Basically recognizing, seeing them. But the elephant in the room. Everybody worries about the elephant in the room. Pretending the elephant ain't there doesn't help. Denying the elephant's there doesn't help. But interestingly enough, just recognize that the elephant is there. And again, it's not denying it. Like you got a gut instinct where you want to say to the other person, look, I don't want you to think that I've been disrespectful. I don't want you to think I've been ignoring you. The 2 millimeter shift is, instead of denying it, calling it out. And say, I'm sure it seems like I've been ignoring you. Or it seems like I've been unresponsive. Now, that's a pure definition of empathy.
Wow.
Because the fine line in there is that you never agreed that it was true, fair, or accurate. You just demonstrated that you understood that that's how it seems to them. And the diffusing power of that is enormous. That is disarming.
That's powerful stuff. That's so powerful.
Yeah. It works, too.
Chris, talk to us about why we need to aim for, in a negotiation, that's right, instead of saying yes in negotiation. How do we leverage that?
Yeah, man, there's 3 kind of yeses. There's commitment, confirmation, and counterfeit. And people try to trap us so much into deals that almost everybody gets really good at the counterfeit yes. So first of all, if you've heard a yes, you got a real problem, because there's a really good chance it's a counterfeit. But when somebody says that's right, that's when they believe that what they just heard was the complete truth. That's never a counterfeit response. That's as genuine as people get. So if you really want to know that you're satisfying the Covey guidance of seek first to understand, demonstrate that understanding. When the other side says that's right, you now have put yourself in a best position for success. You want to position yourself to be understood. Demonstrate understanding in order to be understood. And the indicator that you've crossed a threshold is when the other side says that's right. They will never be more open to hearing you than they are in that moment. And on top of everything else, there's something kind of crazy that happens if you affect someone enough so that they say that's right. They start to bond with you. I mean, it doesn't matter who it is. We've had some of the most dangerous people in the world bond with our negotiators when we got a that's right out of them.
Wow. That's powerful. Well, Chris, here's the thing. In my own life, I tend to say you're right. Is there a difference between saying you're right and that's right? I mean, what happens psychologically there?
Yeah, well, when you say you're right, when you're trying to get the other side to leave you alone.
Yeah.
There's no matter what level it is, there's a concession of some sort when you say you're right. Some people, you're right is I give up, I can't take anymore, please stop talking, I no longer have the energy to counter your argument. I mean, whatever varying degree of you're right is, even if what they said you're buying in, you're right is a way to keep a certain amount of psychological distance between you and what they said. You are not taking any ownership whatsoever that you actually agree with any of it. You might not be able to counter the argument, but for whatever reason, you're not willing to embrace it. That's right is when you embrace. Your right is on some level, you're putting the imaginary arm up to try to keep some distance to protect yourself. Absolutely. Which means that they're not, you don't feel bonded to them. You don't feel connected.
Well, on the flip, yes, Chris, I'm sure we also need to learn how to employ the word no effectively. Teach us more about that.
Well, it's kind of which side of no you're on. I mean,
Okay.
You got to get comfortable at saying no gently is the first thing. And instead of, the harsh no, there's ways to express no that encourage continued conversation. And, our number one go-to way of expressing no while continuing the conversation is to say to somebody, how am I supposed to do that? And to say it like that, say it calmly, say it collaboratively, that you're still open to collaboration. You got a real problem with what they're asking you to do. I mean, that's the first way to say no, as opposed to the abrupt no. Now, the flip side of it is people feel so safe when they've said no that, I never ask anybody if they agree. I'll lay something out and I'll say, do you disagree? And they'll either say no, or they'll say no, but here are my problems. Now, what I'm really after is the second part. And because once you said no to something, you don't feel like you've made a commitment in any way, or there's an implied commitment. You don't feel that, so you can be honest about what the problems are. Mm-hmm. But if you say, would this work for you? And I were to say, yes, but, well, but's an erasing word, which means I didn't mean yes anyway. But then I'm going to be afraid that any conditions that I outline are going to be tantamount to agreement, and I'm going to be trapped again. And so I won't be candid with you about what the problems are. You want somebody to be really candid with you. Say, are you against this? Is this impossible? What about this is wrong? Focus on the obstacles, and you'll actually find out what the obstacles are so you can make a great deal.
Yeah, absolutely. That's powerful. Chris, when we're talking about, as you write, bending reality, what does that mean, and how do we leverage that?
Our view of the world is distorted by our perception of loss. It just is. We don't view loss fairly. It stings us more than it really happened. I mean, it's based on, Daniel Kahneman wrote a book, Thinking Fast and Slow. He also won the Nobel Prize in Behavioral Economics on this very idea, which was a loss stings twice as much as an equivalent gain. A loss bends our perspective by double. If you were to lose $5 to me, you'd really remember that. If you were to gain $5 from me, you'd be like, it's just $5. So understanding that loss bends our reality by double, or there's some psychologists that believe that every decision we make is based on what our loss calculation is and our fear of loss. Then I need to take that into account. To understand your decisions, I got to understand what loss you see. And if it's imaginary, then I got to gently use these empathy skills to maybe get you to look at it in a different way. And that's really where these skills come into play, because you use them to find out what's going on in somebody's head and to find out what their loss comparison is. And then, since they're a gentle way to get into somebody's thinking, if you want to get them to look at something else, to discover something else, to guide them to a different discovery, use the same set of skills to do that and get them to look at the situation through a new set of lenses.
Sure. Well, Chris, this is kind of a fun question because I know it's something people deal with. Chris, I'm very Italian, and I make people offers they don't refuse. You know what I'm saying? So I want to set this up. Chris, set it up. We're buying a used car. How do we haggle like a pro?
Yeah, well, haggling is back and forth. And I want you to negotiate against yourself. I don't want to go back and forth with you. So, and it's one of my favorite stories from the book. I mean, I told a story a bunch of times when I have a Toyota 4Runner, and the color is salsa red pearl. It's the sexiest color you ever saw in your whole life.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't haggle on that. I offered the guy one price well below the list. And then I said, look, man, I feel bad because the Forerunner's worth every dime that you're asking for it. It's beautiful. I'm in love with it. It's the only one I could find. But how am I supposed to do that? And I got him bidding against himself because I articulated all his reasons. He's going to say to me, you're not going to find another one anywhere like this. You can't order it. It's the best price. You love it anyway. And so when I articulate all his reasons against me, it leaves him speechless. I take away his logic. He's got nothing to say. And I don't create an argument. I don't create anything for him to push back on. And we get so many people. I got a bunch of videos on our YouTube page, people talking about using the same technique to get an awesome price on a vehicle. Tell them it's awesome, and then say, how am I supposed to do that? And they'll come down.
Folks, you just saved some money right there. That's solid, Chris.
And go out and buy a car, man. Just check it out. We got a lot of resources for people to get better at. The YouTube channel is one of them. There's several videos there where people lay it out step by step. That's exactly what they did when they bought their vehicle.
That's good. Well, Chris, as we're landing the plane in our conversation today, I'd love to ask, because we love stories here, I'd love to ask, what's the wildest hostage negotiation situation you've ever been in? I'd love to hear the story.
Well, the wildest one was it was a cab driver in the Philippines that kept a bottle of ether under the front seat of his cab, and if you were dumb enough to fall asleep in the front of his cab, he'd pour it all over you. You'd wake up in his basement in chains. And I had never encountered a lone kidnapper before, and he was a serial killer, and he was a lone kidnapper. And not only had I never encountered one before, I hadn't even heard of one. And I had enough experience that if I hadn't heard of it, it was unlikely. It was a unicorn, and this guy was a unicorn. And we got into the negotiation, and I remember that bank robber that we talked about earlier, the really controlled guy who was always talking about everybody else. I'm coaching a negotiation with this kidnapper because I always coached kidnappings. And this guy is just talking so much about the other guys and using nothing but plural pronouns. I remember thinking to myself, we're talking to the boss. This guy's in charge.
Wow.
I didn't realize how right I was, because if he was a lone guy, he was clearly in charge. And he was a killer too, because we caught this guy in a rescue operation about 28 days after the kidnapping started. And he was going to kill our hostage. And we were actually negotiating whether or not we're going to pay a daily rate to keep the hostage alive. He didn't want just a ransom. He wanted a daily rate to keep the hostage alive. And in coaching the negotiator, who I'm still in touch with today, based on our coaching on his own, he says, when we run out of money on the daily amount, what's going to happen? And he says it just like that. And understand, the guy on the other side is a serial killer. And the guy on the other side says, it'll be all right. Which is a promise to not ever hurt the hostage. And I remember even my negotiators didn't hear that the first time. They told me this, we had this conversation, this is what this guy said, we're not sure what to make of it. We think it's good. And I go, good? He just promised he wouldn't, if we didn't pay him, he wouldn't kill the hostage. And there were a total of 2 rescue attempts in that case. The first one, the Philippine National Police missed the stronghold by so far. The bad guy didn't even know that there had been a rescue operation the night before. They were like blocks away. And we called the next morning expecting him to be just livid. And he was like, hey guys, what's going on? He didn't even know what had happened. And he went out on a second rescue attempt about a week and a half later. And we caught up with the bad guy and grabbed him and rescued the hostage. And it was cool. It was awesome.
Unbelievable. So powerful. Folks, he is Chris Voss. He is the former lead hostage negotiator for the FBI. Chris, this has been a powerful conversation. I'd love for everyone to dive into your resources more. How can we connect with you?
The best way is to subscribe to our newsletter. We put out a weekly, concise, digestible article on negotiation, and concise is the word. It comes out on Tuesday morning. And it's not one of those things where you got to go drink a cup of coffee because it was such an exhausting read. And the best way to subscribe to a complimentary newsletter is via text. Text the message, FBI Empathy, all one word, Be careful not to let your spell check put a space between FBI empathy. FBI empathy, all one word, lowercase, send it to the number 22828, and that's 22828. And you'll get a text back to sign up for the newsletter, and it is a gateway to our resources.
So good. Chris, last words. I'd love for you to just give the listener something to launch off this show with, to engage, to employ in their lives. What would you have to say? Last tip.
Hear the other side out first. You'll be shocked at how often the other side will make the deal for you if you take the time to encourage them and hear them out. It'll save you a massive amount of time.
Powerful. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much. I've completely enjoyed it.
What a cool conversation with Chris Voss. Again, he is the former lead hostage negotiator for the FBI and the author of Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It. Please go get a copy of that today. But hey, I want to take a moment just to recap some of the key statements from our conversation with Chris. Chris said this: just because you can talk doesn't mean you know how to communicate. Isn't that true? He went on to say, you don't rise to the occasion. None of us do. You fall to your highest level of preparation. Then, of course, as we dove into communication of meeting, Chris went on to say, what you say is important, but how you say what you say carries even more weight. Well, this week's action step is to take one of the tactics Chris taught us, perhaps mirroring, and use it at work. Use it in your relationships. If you're going to use mirroring, just remember, mirroring is to repeat the last 1 to 3 words of whatever the person said last, and just listen. Remember that doing so provides tactical empathy and really builds trust and understanding in the relationship. Well, next week on this show, author of the brand new book, I Declare War, Levi Lusko is here. We're talking all about how to combat the war inside your mind. Here's a little preview.
They actually say that your emotional quotient, leadership quotient, which of course includes self-awareness and self-management and all that, they say it's a better predictor of your success in business than your IQ is. And they can actually track how well you do on a self-awareness and emotional intelligence test. To every point you add on that is literally like what you'll add to your salary and your earning power long-term in life. And I think people don't know that. They think, oh, if I'm smart, if I'm whatever, I'm going to do well, not realizing how important and how much of an Achilles heel it can be that you're just not socially smart and self-aware. And so having some hard moments with God and some hard looks at some of the data has caused me in the past few years to really try and do as much as I can to improve in those areas. And it's been a really difficult but rewarding journey for me. And I think partially the problem is we kind of live in this era where the bad boy CEO is like basically praised. Like, Steve Jobs is a perfect example.
Yes.
Because he was brilliant, he allowed himself to be just a complete and total tyrant and jerk. And I think it's almost like there's this misunderstanding that it's not only possible, but it's actually preferable to be genius and good, but also to be kind.
That's next week right here on the show. Don't miss my conversation with Levi Lusko, the author of the brand new book, I Declare War. Well, guys, thanks again for joining the conversation today with Chris Voss. Before I let you go, I want to ask you to do a favor for me, and that's go to the Apple Podcast app or iTunes right now and leave me a rating and review of the show. It really helps the show gain exposure and get in front of more ears, which at the end of the day helps me help other people just like you design their roadmap to wholeness. Guys, let's hang out on social media. I'm at 00 Chris Cook on Twitter and on Instagram. You can also find me on Facebook. And of course, wintoday.tv for blog posts and archive podcasts, all aimed at helping you design your roadmap to wholeness from the inside out. I hope you have a great week. We'll talk to you again really soon. Bye-bye.